Welcome to Cloudy with a Chance of Podcast, a show all about weather and science. I'm Storm Center 7 Chief Meteorologist McCall Vrydaghs.
And I'm meteorologist Kirstie Zontini. We're two broadcast meteorologists in Dayton, Ohio, and we can't stop talking about weather. So when we're not on TV, we figured why not jump behind the microphone and talk about it some more.
Each episode, we talk to experts and other fun guests to learn more about the atmosphere, space, and our changing climate. Thanks for stopping by.
And we hope you enjoy the show.
I'm so excited for today's guest, Kirstie. We have Meredith Garofalo on with us. I'm sure if you're watching the video version, you're seeing her already. But for those of you that are listening to our podcast this week, Meredith is an Meredith is an award-winning, almost Emmy-winning, but you're Emmy-nominated certified broadcast meteorologist. It's only a matter of time, Meredith.
Yeah, exactly.
And a science space correspondent. She is currently a senior meteorologist for News 12 New York, covering the Hudson Valley, Long Island, and the tri-state area region, which, by the way, is the region that I grew up in.
Nice.
So mom and dad are watching Meredith every day. She was the 2021 chair of the AMS Station Scientist Committee. I was on the committee with her when she was the chair. I was very inspired by her, and we made a great relationship that
That's
she
awesome.
nominated me to become the chair-elect, which I currently am, and will be the chair coming next year. So thank you, Meredith, to that. That's how this relationship between us started. And the committee really focuses on raising greater awareness and outreach when it comes to science education for viewers. Meredith has a whole really long bio,
Right.
and we're going to talk to her more about that because she is such a unique person, a unique soul, but that's just a brief introduction of Meredith. Kirstie was saying before we started, you feel like you know Meredith too.
I know. Meredith, you're all over the place. But
I know. I just need a space capsule, right? To start going all over the country.
that is fantastic. But a lot of times when we have other meteorologists on, sometimes we want you to talk a little bit about your path. And Meredith is a Cleveland girl. She's got a great Cleveland shirt on right now. So Meredith, tell us a little bit about your story of where you started out, what got you interested in weather. We all want to know more.
Well, first off, I'm so happy to be sitting here with you ladies because, as we know, it's such a small business, even though it's not. And so I already feel like I know obviously McCall from our calls, but Kirstie, I feel like we're already friends this morning doing this. But I was born and raised in Parma, Ohio, which is south of Cleveland, and so that's why Cleveland born and bred. Still represent my hometown teams, even though I live in New York now, which is tough, as we all know with sports. But so I've been wanting to actually be a meteorologist since I was 3. My mom survived, and a lot of you that are watching from the Dayton area may remember the 1974 super outbreak, April 3rd, 4th. And my mom actually witnessed the tornado in Xenia forming across the street.
Oh my goodness.
It touched down in the backyard. Their house was okay. The next house, this was a split level. The second half was gone, and everything else in the neighborhood was wiped out. And you probably can't see my goosebumps now.
I'm feeling it too.
She told me the story of her survival and the Red Cross. And there's just something, it was almost serendipitous at that point because it paved the path for my interest in weather and severe storms and tornadoes. So now we do Facebook Lives. Back then I was doing my own Fisher-Price tape recordings of weather forecasts. Making things up, which I actually still have to this day, which is really cool with technology. But it's always been something that was in my soul and my passion. So I grew up watching the NOAA videos and going to the library and getting as many books as I could on severe storms and tornadoes. And I went to Valparaiso University in Northwest Indiana, where I got my Bachelor of Science in Meteorology and minors in TV and radio broadcasting. And then I did my internships with Tom Skilling at WGN TV. And
the legend.
Yes, I know. The legend. He was great. And I also did an internship with the radio station, WJOB. So I got to do some of their weather updates during the week. And then, my career just kind of lifted off from there. I've worked at TV stations all over the country, which has really been a blessing because I've gotten to learn how to forecast seriously every type of weather. I've lived and worked in Ohio, Indiana for college, Florida, California, Colorado, before ending up here in the New York City market. So literally I can say that I'm the type of career that started at one of the bottom markets and literally worked my way to the top.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I think that's great for any aspiring meteorologist. It's
Mhm.
always nice to hear those stories. But just for anybody, especially weather enthusiasts, because there are a lot of people who maybe didn't pursue meteorology, but just like you, they've been touched by a severe weather
Mhm.
event, and it's something that they are a hobbyist or a storm spotter. So thank you so much for sharing. So while you're in New York,
Yes.
you got to cover a really cool story, and our series for this new season is our changing climate. So we've had each episode is kind of focused on something with climate change. So we now have you as our third guest.
Mhm.
So let's dive in.
Yeah, and it's a very specific story.
Yeah.
We've kind of had like
Broad topic.
broad
kind of things.
topics for the past 2 episodes, but your story caught my eye when you posted it on social media. And this has to do with the eastern coastline, how climate change is affecting the coastline there, specifically near Long Island. But I know you did a lot of research, and what's being revealed. So I'm going to let you take it away and kind of let our listeners and watchers know about this very special, interesting story and how our climate is impacting those regions.
Well, when my station decided to do a climate special and they asked us for ideas, and I've seen so many climate stories that have been done, and they're a lot the same. And so as not just a meteorologist, I also really enjoy and have dove into my storytelling and reporting skills, and putting that in with my background in science. And I started trying to think, well, what's something unique in this area that climate might be affecting? And I ended up finding an article by the BBC from years ago talking about how our shipwrecks from centuries ago are being impacted by things that are changing, such as water temperature and what's in the water. And so I thought, this is really interesting, because when I looked, there are more than 7,000 shipwrecks across the Northeast.
Mhm.
Wow.
And some of these are dating back from the 1900s, the 1800s. And if you think about it as a scientist, it makes sense, because back in the day, anytime we had fog events,
Mhm.
sometimes it would be hard for the ships to navigate their way toward shore. And then they'd end up coming into an area where they would run aground, or they
Right.
couldn't even see a lighthouse. I mean, there's so many events along the South Shore of Long Island, for example, where ships just ended up coming in and crashing because they didn't have the tools and technology like we do today. And apparently, what's going on under the surface is big storms like, for example, Superstorm Sandy, and some of these huge swells that are coming in are actually tearing apart some of these shipwrecks.
Mhm.
And I spoke to a diver who is one of the top divers in our region, who actually goes down to the shipwrecks, tells the stories. Sometimes they'll salvage stuff that'll go into the museums and, bring history back to life. But because of these intense waves and the warming waters, we're getting these changes, and especially in the ecosystems that are on these
Yeah.
shipwrecks. Because you see pictures, I mean, we think of the famous one of the Titanic.
Mhm.
You see all these animals and little creatures and sea creatures that have made it home. Well, when the water temperature changes and you have different species that are either coming in or going out, you're changing the ecosystem upon the ship. And we think about ecosystems like on Earth, like
Mhm.
on the ground, but there are actually ones that are underwater as well. And so because of Sandy, this one shipwreck, that was a Canadian coal schooner back almost 100 years, more than 100 years ago now, part of it washed ashore because Sandy broke a part of what was underwater and brought it in.
Wow.
That's incredible. So when you came across this idea for this story, where did you start? I mean,
Yeah.
did you just start calling divers? Like where was that thought process?
First thing I did was I thought, okay, I need 2 parts to this story. I need somebody who has seen this firsthand.
Mhm.
And then I also need somebody that's an expert, that's that has the background in science. So I started reaching out to some of my friends at NOAA and some of the climate research centers in DC, but I needed somebody local, because as you know, with local news, you need that local angle. So I ended up getting in touch with somebody who used to be in the news business, who knew a diver in the area who's featured in my story. And so I got on the phone with him and we started talking, and I kind of told him what I was doing, and he recommended the Long Island Maritime Museum, which was great because they actually have a whole area on our shipwrecks here in the Long Island area.
Wow.
So we started talking and realized the more information we were getting that this was going to be a really unique and interesting story. And so that's kind of how it all came together.
That's so cool.
What would you say is like the most surprising part of the story as you're going through it? Because I think a lot of times when we're doing these special stories, we're like, okay, this is my story. And then you go into the story and you're like, wait.
My mind is blown.
My mind is blown, but this is my story, this part.
Yeah.
Was there a moment in this process that maybe your story path changed?
Well, I've always been fascinated by the water in general. So I think finding this new story of something, because when I started to Google it, I thought, well, maybe there's other articles, other New York stations have done something. None of the local stations had really touched on it or did features on it. And then I thought about our fishing communities here. And we were talking about the ecosystems changing. Then another angle came to me of, wow, different fish are coming in or leaving. So this is going to impact that. And I realized that, yes, it may not directly impact us, but there are a lot of people that are fascinated with shipwrecks and a lot of fishers and a lot of, ways our coastline is changing, but we don't realize it's not just at the coast. It also goes beneath the surface as well. And that's when I really was excited to dive into this and find out more, because that's how we learn. And as scientists, that's how we can help change what's happening moving forward when we bring things to light.
I think it's also interesting too, because we talk a lot about climate change in the future, but this is like that direct connection to the past and how it's, these shipwrecks happened hundreds and hundreds of years ago, but by disrupting them, you're kind of changing the past. You're changing what artifacts are able to get pulled up, what parts of the ships are becoming, trash on, not trash, but it is. It's like if you've got a ship that goes up onto shore that was underwater for years and years, that's a whole nother issue of dealing with that kind of debris. And then really the ecosystems, I didn't even think about that, but that's so true. All the fish and the coral and everything that lives on those old boats, if they're getting displaced, that's crazy. I just, it's just such an interesting thing to think about how the past is impacted as well.
And people don't realize it too, especially people that live like right on the coastline, that you go out a couple of miles and beneath the surface, you have a ship that might have had the most wild and unique and crazy story about how it ran aground, or, people, everyone loves the stories. And, now as these shipwrecks continue to disintegrate, they're going deeper into the ground until they're no more. And maybe for your grandfather, his grandfather was the captain of that ship. And that's the only thing you have left. And now all of a sudden it's disappearing because of all the different things that are going into this change. And it's fascinating to think about that. It's something where, we don't think about things. And then once we see it or hear it, you're like, wow, that is so interesting.
Yeah. And I think the interesting part, as you're like, all of this is interesting, first of all, but second of all, that there is a tie back to climate change as to why this is happening, because it's like, why?
Right.
Why are these ships being exposed? I can understand that they're, obviously changing the ecosystem as they're being exposed, but why are they being exposed? Can you kind of touch on that a little bit?
So more of these extreme weather events are happening. So you may get a storm that is really, really big swells and, underwater that move it a little bit. Then the next one comes through and it's in a position where next thing you know, that ship is broken apart into pieces. And then some of those pieces are floating away. Some of those are disintegrating. It's something that's happening and we're not even seeing that unless it's through the eyes of a diver. Which actually, this whole thing makes me want to go and get my diving license and go down there and see it firsthand. So I'm kind of intrigued now.
Well, like, you need any more projects. Meredith, the project queen. This is so interesting to me. And I guess my question to you is, obviously you caught the attention of me and Kirstie with this story. what was the response from, your maybe your news team, the people of Long Island? What was their thought?
Everybody, I think, was kind of just surprised. Like my one of my very good friends, Antoinette Fiordi, she's my co-anchor on the weekends. When I was talking to her about it, she had done a story on diving, I believe, year or two ago, and that didn't even cross her mind when she was doing that story. But now it's like it gives that whole different perspective. And every single one of my photographers and other people I worked with that I showed the story to before it aired, I mean, they just sat there and were just blown away that this is yet again another example of how our changing climate is impacting our earth, and for some people daily lives, and it's altering our history. And I remember the one photographer I talked to, I worked with him on another story. He was just like, you actually stood on the beach next to a shipwreck. That's so cool. I remember him saying that directly. And I'm like, yes. And it's crazy because that's history I would have never seen in my life, that Superstorm Sandy washed part of it ashore. And I bet you most people in Long Island had no idea. If you walk that much further on the beach into this more desolate area, you're going to find parts of the Bessie White.
That, I think that's really what kind of like blows my mind in this whole situation. It's that, you're standing next to this one shipwreck, but there are so many more. And this isn't just a Long Island coastline type of situation. This is also going to be a problem up and down the East Coast.
Absolutely. And I'm interested, in learning more about other regions. I mean, especially if there are some coastal areas where, say, they might have more runoff than others, or they have more, what's the word I'm looking for? Sometimes I should have had more coffee this morning, but runoff from like plants and things, and you're disrupting that. Or, say further south where we know the waters are a lot warmer, a lot longer. And I know there are shipwrecks. The person I interviewed just was diving off the Florida coast. So then you think, okay, we just had Ian, for example. Did that impact our shipwrecks in the Gulf?
Right.
Probably.
Yeah.
So I think this is something where I started the topic. I brought this up, but now I would be interested to see if more people would look into this and collaborating, and even on like the government levels, with NOAA, what's going on, and is there anything? I mean, I don't think there's much we can do, especially with these storms coming in, but does that mean now we need to get more divers out there to document this information, to document what's happening?
Right. Yeah, and I think so. And I really do believe this is just like the tip of the iceberg, not like pun intended, but maybe a little bit, yeah, exactly. But, as the water is changing, coastlines are changing. And I know that they're different types of ships, but I think, off the coast of Hawaii, Pearl Harbor, those ships that you can see, what is climate change doing to those ships? And that
if
has
anyone wants to fly me out there and go do that story, I would love to, because I've never seen it, and that's one on my bucket list.
Yeah, I mean, take me with you.
Yes.
But I think of like that has such a historical significance. Not that those shipwrecks along Long Island do not,
Right.
but such a historical significance to,
Our
globally,
right.
Of what happened there. So I'd be interested to see if there's any impacts from that. So I think we should see more and more stories like yours. They're so interesting. And I'm so happy that you dug into this story.
Especially, we talk a lot about being in Ohio. So when we talk about climate change, everybody thinks of just beach erosion or wildfires out west or the drought out west. And, this is something that, again, we don't have shipwrecks per se, but it's such an interesting topic that it's just another way to just think about it and think about, like, it doesn't have to be happening in Ohio for it to be impactful or for it to be interesting, and for it to impact, like you said, the research that we're able to do and some of the connections we're making to the people that were on those shipwrecks way back, hundreds of years ago. We're kind of losing that connection as our climate is changing and impacting these boats. So,
Well, think about the Great Lakes.
yeah,
How many shipwrecks happen there? And yeah,
Right.
I
that's
know.
fresh. That's not salt water.
but it's still,
But yes, what's going on? Is the
Mhm.
temperature rising? Is there something that's also impacting? I mean, you think about a lot of the factories that were along the coastlines,
Mhm.
Indiana, Ohio.
right.
Is there something that's going on that we don't know about because we haven't focused on that topic? Are there divers that have been in the Great Lakes that have noticed changes over the years but haven't really said anything because they didn't think it was anything of it except normal
Right.
disintegration?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. And shipwrecks and boats, that's just one portion of it. But when you're talking about changing water temperatures, we've talked about this because of our geographical location to the lakes, that I've read some studies about the lakes not getting as cold in the
Mhm.
wintertime. And so that means you have a longer chance for lake effect snow events as opposed to
Right.
centuries ago.
Right.
And how does that impact erosion as well? When you get those strong winds, you don't have the ice that's frozen for
Yeah.
several months of the year, but now you're getting these crashing waves on the coastline there. So a lot of climate
Moving
change. Yeah, interesting nuggets there. I do want to change gears a little bit here because I have you on here and I want to talk about space.
Yeah.
Meredith, I
Woo!
can't have you
Space
on and
correspondent.
not talk about space. For our listeners and watchers, I don't think they know how much of a space nerd you are. So let's talk about that a little bit.
It's interesting because I talk about my story about, when I was a little girl and being a meteorologist, and now here I am as a scientist. But back in 2017, I think that's when I can say I was fully bitten by the space bug, because I always get asked that question. They're like, when did you make that shift or that change? And, I loved Star Wars growing up. I always loved watching some of those space movies. But I actually was in Santa Barbara, California, working at the Fox and the ABC affiliates there. And I started to do a story with the National Weather Service office in Los Angeles about the GOES satellite program. And for those who are watching that aren't familiar, those are the next generation satellites that have been crafted and put together between NASA and NOAA. And that's giving us all of that better resolution. I mean, you look at those images, for example, of the hurricanes, and you can see the eye and you can see the clouds and the eye wall. That's from these GOES satellites. And there's 4 in the series. And so far we have 3 that have launched. There's still 1 more to go up, but it was the second one, GOES S, which is now GOES 17,
yeah.
which was GOES West, which is getting moved because it had issues, as we know, like, anything else in life, you live, you learn, right?
Yeah.
But I was working with that National Weather Service office because they were getting the preliminary data from the first satellite from GOES R, which is now GOES East. And they were showing me the data and they were showing me what they were learning, because they knew the next one that would go up was going to be the one looking over the Western Hemisphere, which would help with their forecasting of, storms coming in, atmospheric rivers impacting California all the way up the coast, wildfire detection. And so I sat down for about a half a day with them and did a story on their research and how they were using some of this preliminary data and what they were going to be looking forward to with this satellite watching over the Western Hemisphere. And I realized that aside from, there was a launch to space, there wasn't a lot of space reporting going on.
Mhm.
And just like as scientists, for us, we have the job and the privilege to go on air every day and take something that's complicated and complex like we do and bring it down to an easy to understand story for people, whether you're 5 or 95.
Mhm.
And I kind of felt that as scientists, if we're good storytellers too on that aspect, why not start reporting on the exploration and the science and the technology that's going on in space? And so I covered my first launch back in, was it 2018? But when I moved to Colorado to Denver, I was by United Launch Alliance. I was by Lockheed Martin. And these are some of the big space companies, aerospace companies that are manufacturing and putting together these satellites. And so I got to know GOES, RS. I have to remember, there's so many satellites.
Yeah.
Right.
Second one.
I'm like, I can't help you on that one.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm looking because I have a whole thing on my wall with my first decade of my career and all the space stuff I covered, and I got
love
patches.
that.
Yeah, I got patches and medallions and all that cool nerdy stuff. I'm not going to bore anybody, but
No.
but I got to do an exclusive from after the satellite was built to flying with the satellite on one of the biggest aircrafts in the military to Florida.
That is so cool.
Talking to people the whole time, sitting in the front of the plane with these like military geniuses, and they're
Right.
flying the plane, and I'm just like, oh,
Wow.
this is so cool. Can I fly the? No, you can't fly the plane. Okay,
No
I'll
way.
just sit here and enjoy it and ask questions. And then actually seeing it launch in the process, and that really got me excited. But also when I saw how excited my viewers got to learn about ways that we are going into the next frontier per se, and things we are doing in space. And then through that, I started getting opportunities with NASA to interview the former administrator and deputy administrator, the head of science. And then I was talking to experts from different organizations, and then astronauts on the space station telling me about the science experiments they're doing up there. And I realized that, there's a need for a different type of reporting. But I mean, reporters do a great job.
Yeah.
But when you have a scientific background and you can kind of mesh with these people and talk about how you see science, how they see technology, and then be able to, through your experience, tell these stories, there's such a need for that. So that's kind of how I got that whole Rocket Girl nickname. And I've been going out and doing a lot more interviews and really making sure that science is part of our newscasts every week, and at science as well as space, that is.
Yeah.
It's been really exciting, and I'm starting to see now a lot more people doing that. McCall, I know you put some stuff out sometimes, and so I think people don't realize how much is going on in space, and how much what's going on in space is actually helping us here on Earth.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. That jump from weather to space reporting, considering most of the news right now is about those satellite launches, and that directly impacts us as
how we
meteorologists.
forecast.
So it makes sense that a meteorologist would be covering that. Not only do we have the science background, it is part of our daily life.
Right.
But there's so many more advancements that are coming with space news that I just wonder, are you just excited about that next thing that you can talk about and share with your viewers?
I'm so excited, and people learn stuff too, just like that feedback I got from the shipwreck story, and everyone's eyes just kind of light up. And the goal of our storytelling is what comes next. And so, when you've told a story the right way, you've got people wanting to know what's next. And they're sitting on the edge of their seats, just like when we were watching Star Wars as kids, and the episode came out, and then we had to wait for another one. I mean, it's just like our favorite TV shows, but this is reality. This is what's actually happening. And when I'm researching and finding out we're growing things in space, where if something happened here on Earth and we couldn't grow a certain plant anymore, we're trying to find ways we could grow it on the International Space Station. And then down the road, can we do some of this stuff on Mars?
Right.
I mean, it seems way out there, but it's actually not. I mean, we're in the process of, we already have a rover going around Mars and a helicopter going around Mars. I mean, who would have thought that was ever going to happen?
I know.
It's amazing. I love that you're able to make that a part of, like you said, the daily when it is possible, but that you cover it frequent enough that your viewers know that they're going to be able to get that inside scoop into some of these more complex space stories, as well as just the daily forecast. And I do think that pivot, which kind of makes sense for you and McCall as the station scientist for the AMS, that has become part of our lives as meteorologists. It's more than just you're forecasting and you're tracking severe weather now. I think our community hopes and wants us to be able to take some interesting, complex things, whether it's space related or climate change related, and try to break it down and make it easy to understand. So I do agree. As a space nerd, it is fun to be able to make things easy to digest and to be like, no, this is important. We need to get this in today. We can't ignore this story.
Right.
So
I mean,
kudos to you.
And you think about, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you think about, things that lead a newscast, and it's like, wow, we're sending more astronauts to space. And it's like, okay, the rocket launch is exciting, but let's take this one step further.
Right.
Why are they going up there? What are they doing? They're not just going up there, taking a bunch of selfies and coming back.
Yeah.
I mean,
they're probably doing a few.
I mean, there's so much going on. And I think, and I tell this to people all the time, being on TV, and I'm sure you both can agree, it's a privilege, what we get the opportunity to do every single day. And it's not easy. I mean, our lives are public, what we do is public, but we get the people trust us to get to them and tell them what's going on. And so we have that opportunity to make a difference and to bring these stories to life. I mean, you go back, I mean, before us, you think about the shuttle era. And you think about when the space race first started, from when Sputnik went up to when our astronauts were getting up into space.
Yeah.
This is a whole new era now. And we are taking it another step further. And so why not get people excited about that? I mean, I'm getting chills just talking about it right now.
So, words from the Rocket Girl.
Yes.
Meredith, we just have a couple minutes left, but I want to make sure that our listeners and watchers can follow you because you are always putting out some really interesting content, whether it's climate or space, or, you know, she's a singer. She's sang the national anthem. I don't know how many sporting teams. What's your most did you do it for Cleveland Guardians?
I did do it for Cleveland Guardians last August, and that for me was the hometown, like growing up in that stadium and finally singing. And it was another example of never give up on your dreams, because I did it twice now.
So let our listeners and watchers know how they can follow you and see all of the fun stuff you're doing.
So it's actually quite easy. If you look up at, and then my last name, Garof as in Frank, ALOWX like weather, you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and then I'm also on LinkedIn. So if it's more of a professional, like let's talk about more story ideas, yeah, please connect, or let's just talk about space in general in life. And as McCall is as well, I'm a big advocate for women in STEM and space. And so I love to do a lot of mentoring and programs encouraging young women to go for that sort of career. And so anything I can do to help, or students or classrooms, I'm all game.
She is. She's nonstop. I mean, I've known Meredith for a couple years now. She doesn't stop. But I love it. But she, you know, like you said, women in STEM, I think the relationship that we've had and other female meteorologists, it really inspires us all to grow and be better. And the best way to do that is have the best people in the same room and on the same podcast. So Meredith, thank you so much for joining us. And hopefully we'll get to chat again sometime soon. We can do a whole space series. I think
we'll
Meredith,
have you back on.
We'll have you on.
Yes, please.
Yes, awesome. For all of our listeners and watchers, thank you as always for joining us on Cloudy with a Chance of Podcast.